The cursor blinked on the blank document, mocking my hesitation. 17 years of silence weighed on me as I sat in my apartment. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the usual physiological response I'd come to recognize. It had been 3 days since my last proper meal. The hunger was returning. I took a deep breath and began typing. My name is Vincent Marshall. What I'm about to share will sound impossible, but I swear every word is true. Before I become something I can't control, I need to expose what the government has done, what they turned us into. The words flowed easier after that first sentence. At 45, I barely resembled the confident soldier I once was. My reflection showed a weathered face with premature lines and dark circles beneath my eyes from years of insomnia. The nightmares wouldn't let me rest. The memories remained too vivid. It started in 2005. I was 28, a special forces operative with a promising military career. The selection came without warning, a transfer order that mentioned only a specialized training program that required my unique qualifications. 4 other soldiers received the same orders: James Chen, Daniel Wright, Tom Peterson, and David Garcia. None of us knew each other before, coming from different units and backgrounds, but we shared the same physical profile: peak condition, exceptional service records, and no immediate family connections. They flew us to a remote facility in northern Alaska, miles from the nearest town. The helicopter ride took 3 hours from the base in Fairbanks, over endless wilderness that made it clear how isolated we'd be. Colonel Richards greeted us upon arrival, a tall man with steel gray hair and cold eyes that never seemed to blink enough. "Gentlemen, consider yourselves privileged. You've been selected for Project Prometheus, a program that will redefine warfare in the 21st century." He paced before us in the facility's main briefing room. "What happens here remains classified at the highest level. You will not discuss your experiences with anyone outside this facility, not even among yourselves outside of designated areas." Daniel raised his hand. "Sir, what exactly will we be doing here?" "Advancing your capabilities, right? If successful, you'll return to service with career trajectories many would kill for." The colonel's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Any man who can't maintain absolute discretion should speak now. There's still time to return to your regular duties with no questions asked." None of us spoke up. We were soldiers. Following orders was what we did. The promise of advancement was just an added bonus. The first 3 weeks consisted of intensive baseline testing: physical endurance, cognitive processing, stress response, pain tolerance. Blood draws every morning and evening. We trained together, ate together, slept in adjacent quarters. Despite our different backgrounds, we formed an easy friendship through our shared hardship. James was the most sociable, always ready with a joke to break tension. Daniel naturally fell into the leadership role, his calm, measured approach earning our respect. Tom was the quiet workhorse, reliable and steady. David was perceptive, picking up on details others missed. And me, I was the cautious one, always analyzing, looking for angles and exits. Dr. Elizabeth Harmon oversaw our medical evaluations. "Your baseline performances are excellent," she told us one evening as we gathered in the lab. "But tomorrow, we begin the real work." She unveiled a case containing 5 syringes filled with an amber liquid that seemed to shimmer under the fluorescent lights. "This is SIR-1, she announced with poorly concealed pride. "Synthetic immuno-restructuring formula. It will revolutionize warfare by enhancing your natural capabilities beyond current human limitations." I remember the silence that followed, the way we all stared at those syringes. Enhancement wasn't new to military discussions, but something about the gleam in Dr. Harmon's eyes sent a chill through me. "Side effects?" I asked. "Minor and temporary," she replied too quickly. "Fever, muscle pain, increased appetite, all expected responses as your bodies adapt." The consent forms came next, dozens of pages of scientific jargon and legal clauses. I read more carefully than the others, noting vague phrases about unforeseen physiological adaptations, and behavioral modifications. I hesitated when it came time to sign. Having second thoughts, Marshal? James grinned from across the table, his signature already on the paper. Afraid you won't keep up with the rest of us? The others had all signed. Daniel gave me a reassuring nod. We're in this together. I signed, a decision that haunts me every day since. The first injection happened the next morning. We sat in a row of medical chairs as Dr. Harmon administered the serum one by one. When my turn came, the needle slid into my vein with practiced precision. The liquid entered my bloodstream and immediately I felt it, a burning sensation spreading from my arm through my entire body. Jesus! Tom gasped from 2 seats down, gripping his armrests. The pain intensified, muscles contracting, vision blurring. I bit down on my lip until I tasted blood, determined not to scream. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pain transformed into something else. A wave of euphoria washing through my system. My senses sharpened dramatically. I could hear the heartbeats of everyone in the room, smell the antiseptic on Dr. Harmon's hands, see the dust particles floating in the sunbeam from the window. Holy shit, David whispered. I feel incredible. The changes accumulated rapidly over the following days. We could lift twice our previous maximums. I ran 20 miles on the indoor track without fatigue. James shattered the facility's shooting range record, hitting targets at distances that should have been impossible without a scope. In the cafeteria one evening, 5 days after the first injection, we celebrated our transformation. To Project Prometheus, Daniel raised his water glass in a toast. Making gods of mere mortals. I can't wait to see what we'll be capable of in another week, Tom added. I smiled and toasted with them, but something felt wrong beneath my enthusiasm. The way Dr. Harmon documented our progress with almost obsessive detail. The hushed arguments between her and Colonel Richards I'd overheard walking past his office. The molecular binding is still unstable, she'd insisted. We need more time before increasing the dosage. Washington wants results, not excuses, he'd replied. At night, I'd lie awake, listening to James pacing in his room next door. Sometimes he muttered to himself, words I couldn't quite make out despite my enhanced hearing. Once I heard him hammering his wall with what sounded like his fist, over and over until the concrete cracked. The pounding from James's room eventually stopped that night, but my unease continued to grow. I lay awake until dawn, listening for any further disturbances, my enhanced senses making sleep impossible. When the facility lights automatically brightened at 0600, I was already dressed and waiting. 6 weeks into Project Prometheus, our physical transformations had accelerated beyond anything we'd imagined. The morning testing routine had become as routine as brushing teeth. Weight assessment, reflexes, cognitive processing, and always the blood draws. Every 8 hours, like clockwork, Dr. Harmon or one of her assistants would extract vials of our blood for analysis. Another day, another pint, I joked weakly as a technician slid the needle into my vein with practiced efficiency. The young man didn't respond. None of them ever did. The research staff maintained a clinical distance that had once seemed professional, but now felt deliberate. Our training intensified as Dr. Harmon pushed us to test new capabilities. The regular exercise equipment had been replaced with reinforced versions after Tom bent a barbell last week. This morning, I completed 100 pull-ups without breaking a sweat before moving to the treadmill, where I ran at 30 miles per hour for nearly an hour. But James was something else entirely. He entered the gym late, eyes fixed straight ahead with pupils so dilated his irises were nearly invisible. When he stepped onto the treadmill, he cranked it to maximum speed and ran for 3 straight hours. No water breaks, no visible fatigue. Colonel Richards stood watching him with undisguised pride while Dr. Harmon scribbled notes on her tablet. Remarkable, I overheard Richards say. Chen's adaptation rate exceeds all projections. Yes, though there are anomalies in his latest blood work that warrant, Dr. Harmon began. Numbers on paper, Doctor. Look at him. Richards gestured toward James with an approving nod. That's the future of warfare right there. During afternoon sparring, we rotated partners as usual. When my turn with James came, I approached him cautiously. In his place stood something else. His muscles had grown disproportionate to his frame, veins pulsing visibly beneath his skin. "Ready, Marshal?" James's voice had deepened to a rasp. I barely had time to nod before he launched himself at me with frightening speed. I dodged his first strike by millimeters, feeling the air displace next to my ear. His second connected with my ribs, sending me sliding across the mat despite my enhanced durability. "Point," called the supervising officer. We reset positions. This time I managed to block his initial assault and counter with a sweep that would have taken down any normal opponent. James merely absorbed the impact and grabbed my arm, twisting until I had to tap out. When Tom took my place against James, I expected the usual controlled demonstration of technique. Instead, James moved with unexpected savagery. Tom blocked the first two strikes, but missed the third, a vicious uppercut that sent him sprawling. Before anyone could intervene, James pounced on him, grabbing Tom's right arm and wrenching it at an unnatural angle. The crack echoed through the gym. Tom's scream followed immediately. "Medical team to the training floor," the supervisor called into his radio. James stood over Tom, breathing heavily, with a strange smile on his mouth. "Sorry," he said without a trace of remorse. "Accident." That evening, I sought out Dr. Harmon in her lab. She looked up from her microscope with visible irritation when I entered. "Marshal, this is outside your scheduled testing window." "It's about James," I said, closing the door behind me. "Something's wrong with him." She sighed and removed her glasses. "If you're referring to the training incident, accidents happen, especially with enhanced strength. It wasn't an accident. You've seen how he's changing. The aggression, the physical changes, his eyes. What I see is exceptional adaptation to the serum." She cut me off. "James's metrics are precisely what this project aims to achieve. And his behavior? The way he isolated himself? That's desired too?" Dr. Harmon studied me for a long moment. "Are you concerned about Chen's well-being, Marshal? Or are you struggling with the fact that he's outperforming you?" Her accusation hurt me. "This isn't about competition, isn't it? You were Special Forces, used to being the best. Now you're not." She turned back to her microscope. "I'll note your concerns, but I suggest you focus on your own progress rather than undermining a teammate's success." I left the lab more unsettled than when I'd entered. That night, unable to sleep, I decided to check on Tom in the medical wing. The facility was very quiet during night hours, my footsteps echoing down the concrete corridors. As I passed the main laboratory, a movement caught my eye. The door was ajar, with a thin line of light showing in the hallway. I approached cautiously and peered inside. James stood with his back to the door, hunched over one of the refrigeration units. At first I thought he might be stealing medication, but then he turned slightly, and I saw what was in his hands. A medical blood bag. He was drinking from it, gulping down the dark liquid. I must have made some sound because his head snapped toward me with inhuman quickness. Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. His dilated eyes looked at mine, and for a second, neither of us moved. "Need it," he said simply, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "You will too, eventually." He pushed past me into the corridor, leaving the empty blood bag crumpled on the counter. The next morning, I found Daniel alone in the cafeteria. He looked up from his breakfast, a huge amount of food needed for our enhanced metabolisms. "You look like hell," he observed as I sat across from him. "I need to talk to you about James." I told him everything. The sparring incident, Dr. Harmon's dismissal, and what I'd witnessed in the lab. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned. Blood drinking? He kept his voice low. You're sure? Saw it with my own eyes. And he said I'd need it too eventually. What the hell does that mean? Daniel pushed his tray aside. I've noticed changes too. Nothing this extreme, but his behavior in the combat sims yesterday was... He trailed off. What happened? I pressed. He went off script, ignored the mission parameters completely. Just went through the simulated enemies one by one, tearing them apart. Could have completed the objective in half the time, but he seemed to be... Daniel struggled for the right word. Enjoying it. Too much. We need to tell someone, I insisted. Who? Harmon already shut you down. Richard sees James as his star pupil. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Look, I'll keep an eye on him. Document anything unusual. If we build enough evidence, they'll have to listen. Later that day, the scientists introduced a new combat simulation, a hostage rescue scenario in an urban environment. We ran it in pairs, with James and Tom taking the first attempt despite Tom's arm being in a cast. From the observation room, David and I watched on monitors as they moved through the scenario. The difference between Tom's methodical approach and James's was stark. Where Tom carefully cleared rooms, James burst through walls, attacking the armed hostage takers with his bare hands rather than the provided weapons. Jesus, David whispered beside me as James literally ripped a mannequin's head from its body. That's not combat, that's butchery. And he's smiling, I added, pointing to the close-up camera feed. James's face showed pure pleasure as he destroyed everything in his path. When we ran the simulation ourselves, David and I completed it with higher efficiency ratings, but lower threat elimination scores than James had achieved. You two think too much, Colonel Richards commented during our debrief. Chen acts on instinct. That's what we need in the field. After dinner, David caught up with me in the corridor. We need to talk, he said quietly. Not here. We found an empty storage room where the cameras had limited coverage. Something's very wrong with this project, David said once we were alone. Did you see how pale James looked at dinner? And his eyes? They're never normal anymore. I tried telling Harmon. She thinks I'm jealous of his progress. It's not progress, it's deterioration, and I'm worried the rest of us aren't far behind. David leaned closer. My vision's been changing. At night I can see heat signatures, and I'm hungry all the time, no matter how much I eat. That could just be the serum's effects, I said, though I'd experienced similar changes. Maybe. But what if it's the start of whatever's happening to James? Our conversation was interrupted by the facility-wide announcement system. Dr. Harmon's voice echoed through the corridors. All Project Prometheus participants report to the main laboratory immediately. When we arrived, Tom and James were already there. Tom stood at military attention while James paced restlessly, his movements jerky and unnatural. Daniel arrived moments after us, his expression guarded. Dr. Harmon stood beside Colonel Richards at the front of the room, 5 syringes arranged on the tray before them. The amber liquid inside was darker than our previous injections, with a reddish tint that hadn't been present before. Gentlemen, Dr. Harmon began, your progress has exceeded expectations. Based on your adaptation rates, we're accelerating the timeline. Starting tonight, you'll receive increased dosages of an enhanced formulation of SIR-1. Daniel stepped forward. Ma'am, with respect, shouldn't we complete more stability testing before increasing dosage? Some of us are experiencing side effects that... Your concerns are noted, right? Colonel Richards interrupted. Dr. Harmon's team has analyzed all data and determined this is the appropriate next step. But sir, Daniel persisted, the physiological changes are accelerating faster than projected. Perhaps we should... Are you questioning direct orders, soldier? Richard's voice became very harsh. Daniel stiffened. No, sir. Good, because this project is too important for cold feet. Richards gestured to the syringes. Dr. Harmon, proceed. One by one, we received our injections. The pain was immediate and more intense than before, a burning sensation that spread through my veins. I gripped the medical chair, knuckles white, as my vision blurred. Through the haze of pain, I saw James receiving his injection. Unlike the rest of us fighting to remain composed, he seemed to welcome the burning, his face relaxing into an expression almost like pleasure. That night, as my body adjusted to the increased dosage, I couldn't sleep. My skin felt too tight, my senses overwhelmingly sharp. The soft noise of the ventilation system sounded like jet engines. I could smell everyone in the nearby rooms, their sweat, their breath, their blood. I got up to get water from the small sink in my quarters when I heard voices from the corridor. Moving silently to my door, I pressed my ear against it, my enhanced hearing easily picking up the conversation outside. "Cannot ignore the addiction symptoms, Colonel." Dr. Harmon's voice was tense. Subject 2's blood work shows molecular restructuring of brain chemistry consistent with dependency. "Chen is adapting exactly as intended," Richards replied dismissively. "Bloodlust was not in the project parameters." Harmon's voice dropped lower. "The side effects are escalating. If Washington knew, Washington wants results, not excuses. The bloodlust can be managed and eventually eliminated in future iterations. But the combat potential we're seeing in Subject 2 is exactly what they're paying for." Their footsteps moved away, leaving me frozen by the door. Bloodlust. Addiction. I kept thinking about these words, connecting them with the image of James drinking from that blood bag. The next morning, I approached the others at breakfast, determined to share what I'd overheard. Daniel and David listened intently, their expressions growing more concerned with each word. Tom, however, shook his head in disbelief. "You're making this up," he accused, his casted arm cradled protectively against his chest. "James is just adapting better than the rest of us. You can't handle that he's the best." "This isn't about who's best," I insisted. "Something's happening to him, to all of us. The serum isn't stable." "Vincent's right," David added. "Haven't you noticed the changes? The mood swings, the hunger? All I see is Vincent trying to sabotage James because he can't keep up." Tom stood, grabbing his tray. "I'm going to train with someone who isn't spreading paranoid bullshit." As Tom walked away, Daniel sighed heavily. "He won't listen. He and James were close before all this." "And James is getting worse," I said. "Who knows what the increased dosage will do to him?" "To all of us," David corrected quietly, pushing away his half-eaten breakfast. "I haven't told anyone, but I've been having dreams, violent ones. I wake up wanting to hunt, to tear things apart with my bare hands." We fell silent as James entered the cafeteria. He filled a tray with triple portions, then sat alone in the corner. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, the veins beneath it dark and prominent. As he ate rapidly and systematically, his eyes constantly scanned the room like a predator assessing prey. The atmosphere in the facility had changed completely. What had begun with friendship and shared purpose now seemed dangerous. 5 men changing into something else entirely. Scientists pushing boundaries without concern for consequences. And at the center of it all, James, Colonel Richards' star subject, becoming something less human with each passing day. And underneath it all, a terrible certainty was growing in my mind. This was only the beginning of our nightmare. 3 weeks after I'd caught James drinking blood, the memory haunted me every night as I lay awake, listening for movement in the corridors. That terrible certainty that we were headed toward disaster grew stronger each day. James continued to deteriorate before our eyes, his humanity slipping away in small, terrifying increments that the scientists either couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. Colonel Richards announced a combat readiness test for that morning. The obstacle course had been modified with automated opponents, combat drones programmed to simulate enemy combatants. We gathered at the entrance in our tactical gear, checking our weapons loaded with non-lethal training rounds. James arrived last. The changes in him were shocking. Veins pulsed visibly beneath his grayish skin. His muscles had continued to grow disproportionately, straining against his uniform. But his eyes bothered me most. Completely black now, with no visible iris, constantly scanning, never blinking. "Everyone clear on the objective?" Daniel asked, maintaining his leadership role despite the tension. "We neutralize all targets and extract the intelligence package from the central building." Tom nodded eagerly. "Simple enough." David caught my eye with a worried look. We'd both noticed how James kept staring at Daniel's throat as he spoke. "Let's establish positions," Daniel continued. "James, you take point. Tom, back him up. Vincent and David, take the flanks. Keep radio contact at all times." "Copy that," I replied, grateful to be positioned away from James. Colonel Richards watched from the observation deck above, Dr. Harmon at his side with her tablet. "Begin on my mark," his voice announced through the speakers. 3, 2, 1, execute." We entered the course at a run. It was designed like a small village, with buildings, alleyways, and strategic choke points. The automated opponents, metallic humanoid figures on treaded bases, patrolled with sensor arrays that would register our presence. For the first 15 minutes, everything proceeded according to plan. James moved with frightening efficiency, disabling drones before they could even register his presence. I took out 3 targets on my assigned route, surprised at how easily I anticipated their movements, how time seemed slow when I aimed. "Central building secured," Tom's voice crackled over the radio. "Moving to extract the package." "Copy that," Daniel responded. "Vincent, David, converge on the central building to provide—" The radio erupted with screaming, not the controlled shouting of combat. This was primal, agonized, the sound of a man dying in pain. "Daniel," I called into my radio. "Report. Tom, James, what's happening?" Only more screaming answered, then a wet, gurgling sound that turned my blood cold. "Vincent, east side." David's voice, tense but controlled. "I'm approaching from the west." I sprinted toward the central building, vaulting a concrete barrier with ease. The door had been ripped from its hinges. Inside, the lights flickered. The screaming had stopped. I moved silently through the entrance hall, weapon raised. A wet, tearing sound came from the main room ahead. Rounding the corner, I froze at the scene before me. Daniel lay on his back, eyes open and empty, his throat a mangled cavity. James straddled him, hands and face covered in blood. He wasn't just killing Daniel, he was feeding on him, tearing chunks from his neck and shoulders with teeth that had elongated into points. "James!" Tom's shout came from the other side of the room. He stood with his weapon raised. "Stop! What the hell are you doing?" James's head snapped up, his face barely recognizable beneath the mask of blood. He moved with blinding speed, crossing the room before Tom could fire. One hand gripped Tom's weapon, crushing the barrel. The other seized his neck. "No!" Tom managed before James twisted with a sickening crack. Tom's body crumpled to the floor. James turned toward me, his black eyes finding mine. Blood dripped from his mouth as his lips pulled back in what might have been a smile. "Hungry," he rasped, his voice no longer human. "So hungry, Vincent." I backed away, raising my weapon. "James, this isn't you, it's the serum. We can get you help." He tilted his head, studying me like a curious predator. "Help? No help. Only hunger. Only blood." He took a step forward. "Your blood smells right." Movement in my peripheral vision. David had arrived at the other entrance, taking in the carnage with wide eyes. "Vincent," he whispered, "we need to go. Now." James's head swiveled toward David's voice. In that split second of distraction, I fired 3 rounds into his chest. The impacts barely staggered him. "Run!" I shouted to David, turning to flee down the corridor. David followed close behind. "Emergency protocol," he gasped. "Button by the main entrance." We sprinted through the maze of hallways. Behind us, James roared, a sound no human throat should produce. The walls shook with the force of his pursuit. We reached the entrance, slamming our hands against the emergency button. Sirens wailed as steel barriers began descending from the ceiling. "Security team, code red," I shouted into my radio. "James has gone hostile. Daniel and Tom are down. Repeat, Daniel and Tom are dead." The radio crackled. "Copy that. Containment protocol initiated. Gas deployment in progress." White vapor began pouring from vents in the ceiling. We backed away from the sealed entrance as the sound of James's approach grew louder, concrete cracking under his footsteps, metal bending as he tore through obstacles. "This way," a security officer called from a side door. "Evacuation route." We stumbled through, gasping as the door sealed behind us. Through a reinforced window, I watched the corridor fill with gas. James burst into view, moving on all fours now, his movements animalistic. The gas swirled around him as he sniffed the air, black eyes finding us through the window. He slammed against it, the impact spider-webbing the supposedly unbreakable glass. "It's not holding him," David whispered in horror. Another impact. The cracks spread. The security team arrived, firing tranquilizer rounds. James roared in fury, turning to face this new threat. The darts stuck in his skin like porcupine quills. 1, 2, 6, a dozen. He staggered, swinging wildly at his attackers, catching one man with a blow that sent him flying across the room. Finally, James's movement slowed. He dropped to his knees, then fell forward, his body twitching as the sedatives overwhelmed even his enhanced system. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered behind me. Colonel Richards pushed through the gathered security personnel, his face pale as he surveyed the scene through the window. "Get him to containment," he ordered, pointing at James's unconscious body. "Maximum security protocols. And get a cleanup team to the testing area." Dr. Harmon appeared at his side. Her professional composure cracked for the first time since I'd known her. "Colonel, I warned you about the molecular instability. The blood hunger was a documented risk factor in—" "Not now, Doctor," Richard snapped. He turned to us. "Marshal Garcia, Medical Bay immediately." "Sir, Daniel and Tom are dead," I said, my voice shaking with rage and shock. "James killed them. He was eating Daniel. This whole project is a disaster. We need to shut it down before—" "You need to follow orders, soldier." Richards cut me off. His cold eyes held no grief, only calculation. "Medical. Now." Guards escorted us to the medical bay. My mind raced with images I knew would never leave me. Daniel's vacant eyes, Tom's neck snapping, James's blood-covered face with those pointed teeth. Dr. Harmon entered shortly after. She approached with 2 syringes. "What is that?" David demanded, backing away. "A sedative," she replied evenly. "You've experienced severe trauma. Your enhanced physiologies require specialized medication. No more injections," I said firmly. "No more serums. This ends now." Her expression hardened. "This isn't optional, Marshal." She nodded to the guards, who moved to restrain us. I considered fighting. With my enhanced strength, I could probably overpower them. But then what? We were miles from civilization in the Alaskan wilderness. Even with our capabilities, escape seemed impossible. The needle slid into my arm. Darkness crowded the edges of my vision almost immediately. "You should have listened," I murmured as consciousness faded. "Now we're all monsters." I dreamed of blood, rivers of it flowing through sterile corridors, James swimming through it, his body twisting into something inhuman, Daniel and Tom floating face down, their bodies emptied. 3 days passed before I awoke fully. My head pounded as I tried to sit up, finding myself strapped to the bed. "Easy," David's voice came from nearby. I turned to see him in a similar bed, though his restraints had been removed. "They've been keeping us sedated." "Daniel and Tom?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Dead. They told me yesterday when I woke up." David's face was haggard, eyes haunted. "They're calling it a psychological break triggered by the serum." I struggled against my restraints. And James? Contained. That's all they'll say. The door opened and Colonel Richards entered with Dr. Harmon and 2 armed guards. Release him, Richards ordered, gesturing to my restraints. Once I was free, Richards pulled up a chair between our beds. I'll be direct. What happened was unfortunate, but not entirely unexpected. Every breakthrough has casualties. The casual dismissal of Daniel and Tom's deaths made me angry. Casualties? James tore them apart. He was eating them. A severe adverse reaction to the original formula, Dr. Harmon interjected, not meeting my eyes. SIR-1 contained elements that triggered predatory responses in Chen's brain chemistry. The protein binding was unstable. And you knew this was possible? I accused. I heard you talking about bloodlust weeks ago. Richard's expression hardened. Every military advancement carries risk. The atomic bomb killed its share of scientists during development. So what now? David asked quietly. You quarantine us until we start eating people too? No. Richards leaned forward. Project Prometheus continues with modifications. Dr. Harmon has developed SIR-2, an improved formula that eliminates the unfortunate side effects James experienced. I stared at him in disbelief. You can't be serious. After what happened? Deadly serious, Marshal. The project is too valuable to abandon. SIR-2 uses a different molecular binding agent that prevents the deterioration of frontal lobe function while maintaining enhanced physical capabilities. And if we refuse? I challenged. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's not an option. You signed the consent forms. The military has invested millions in your development. And now, with 3 subjects lost, you and Garcia are even more valuable. Lost? David's voice rose. Daniel and Tom were murdered. By James. By what your serum turned him into. A tragedy, Richards agreed without sincerity. But Chen's reaction was extreme. An outlier. The data from his case has proven invaluable in refining the formula. I looked to Dr. Harmon, searching for any sign of human decency. Doctor, you can't continue this. You've seen what the serum does. Something flickered in her eyes. Doubt, perhaps even guilt, before her clinical mask returned. SIR-2 is fundamentally different, Marshal. We've corrected the flaws. When? David asked, resignation in his voice. Tomorrow morning, Richards replied, standing. The facility is now under elevated security. Military police have been stationed at all exits. All communications are restricted. This is for your protection as much as operational security. After they left, David and I sat in silence for several minutes. We're prisoners, I finally said. David nodded. We always were. We just didn't know it. I don't trust this SIR-2. Even if it works better, they're still experimenting on us. Do we have a choice? I looked at the reinforced door, the cameras in each corner of the room. Not right now. The next morning, we were escorted to the main laboratory. The facility had changed overnight. Armed military police stood at every junction, with serious expressions beneath their helmets. The research staff avoided eye contact as we passed, moving quickly through the halls. In the lab, Dr. Harmon waited with 2 syringes containing a clearer liquid than the amber SIR-1. SIR-2 represents a complete redesign, she explained as technicians prepared our arms. The binding agent prevents neural deterioration while enhancing physical capabilities beyond what SIR-1 achieved. Will it make us want to eat people? I asked bluntly. Her jaw tightened. No. The protein structure that triggered the predatory response has been eliminated. And James? David asked. What happens to him? A shadow crossed her face. Subject 2 is providing valuable data for future iterations. The injection hurt worse than the first. My veins turned to fire, muscles spasming so violently the restraints barely held. I bit through my lip trying not to scream. Beside me, David convulsed, blood trickling from his nose. When the pain finally subsided, hours had passed. Unlike the euphoria that followed SIR-1, SIR-2 left me feeling hollow, like my insides had been scooped out and replaced with something foreign. Over the next 3 days, the changes became apparent. My strength doubled compared to SIR-1. I could bend steel with my bare hands, run at speeds approaching 60 miles per hour. My senses sharpened even further. I could hear conversations 3 rooms away, see in near total darkness. But the hunger remained absent. No cravings for blood, no predatory impulses toward others, just a constant gnawing emptiness that food couldn't satisfy. 1 week after receiving SIR-2, I convinced a guard to let me see James. "I need closure," I insisted, "to understand what happened to my friends." The guard hesitated before escorting me to a reinforced door in the facility's lowest level. "5 minutes," he said, swiping his keycard. "Doctor's orders." The observation room overlooked a steel-walled chamber. In the center, strapped to a reinforced table with thick titanium restraints, lay what had once been James Chen. I barely recognized him. His skin had turned completely gray, muscles bulging unnaturally beneath it. His jaw had elongated to accommodate teeth that no longer fit in a human mouth. Sharp, pointed things designed for tearing flesh. His fingers had extended into clawed appendages that constantly flexed against their restraints. 2 scientists in hazmat suits extracted samples, blood, tissue, spinal fluid, from his restrained body. James's black eyes followed their movements like a predator. When one scientist moved closer to adjust an IV, James lunged against his restraints with such force the entire table shuddered. "Incredible adaptation rate," a technician murmured beside me, making notes. "Complete physiological restructuring to optimize predation." "That was my friend," I said quietly. The technician glanced at me, then back at his tablet. "That was Subject 2, the most successful SIR-1 recipient in terms of physical enhancement. The psychological deterioration is unfortunate but informative." Through the glass, James's head suddenly turned. His black eyes found mine with uncanny precision despite the one-way mirror. A smile spread across his inhuman face, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "Vincent," he mouthed, the word clear despite the barrier between us. "Soon." I stumbled back, chilled to the bone. "Fascinating," the technician noted. "He still recognizes former team members." I left without another word. The image of James burned into my mind. That thing on the table wasn't my teammate anymore. It was something else entirely. Something created by human arrogance and military ambition. And the most terrifying thought of all, with SIR-2 coursing through my veins, how long until I became something just as inhuman? That night I lay awake in my quarters, staring at the ceiling. Down the hall I could hear David pacing restlessly in his room. Neither of us had spoken much since seeing what remained of James. The weight of our situation pressed down on us. We had become something more than human. But at what cost? Daniel and Tom were dead. James had transformed into a creature out of nightmares. And we continued changing day by day, under the watchful eyes of scientists who viewed us not as men, but as experiments. Dr. Harmon's words echoed in my mind. SIR-2 is fundamentally different. Maybe she was right. Maybe we wouldn't develop the bloodlust that consumed James. But as I felt the power running through my enhanced body, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed a line that humanity was never meant to cross. 6 weeks passed in a blur of testing and adaptation. The hollow feeling from SIR-2 never fully disappeared, but my body transformed in ways that made even my previous enhancements seem trivial. I could now bend steel as easily as folding paper, and run at speeds approaching 60 miles per hour without breaking a sweat, and my senses had sharpened to nearly supernatural levels. I could hear conversations 3 rooms away, see in near total darkness, and detect the individual sense of everyone in the facility. David experienced similar changes. We trained together daily, pushing boundaries that shouldn't have been possible for human beings to cross. Through it all, We spoke little about what had happened, about Daniel and Tom, about the thing that James had become. Our silence was an agreement. Survive now, process later. The results are extraordinary, Colonel Richards announced during our morning briefing, reviewing our latest test metrics with poorly concealed satisfaction. Sire 2 has surpassed all performance projections without the complications of the original formula. Dr. Harmon stood beside him. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and a new nervous tic had developed. She constantly checked the security monitors visible from the briefing room. The molecular stability remains consistent, she reported, her voice flat and clinical. No signs of neural deterioration or aggressive impulse enhancement in either subject. Subject, not soldier, not person. The dehumanization was subtle but deliberate. What about James? I asked, interrupting their self-congratulation. Any changes in his condition? Richards's jaw tightened. Subject 2's status is not your concern, Marshal. He killed my friends, I said, meeting his cold stare. I think that makes it my concern. After a tense silence, Dr. Harmon sighed. Chen's condition continues to progress along expected lines. The biological samples we've collected are proving invaluable for understanding the SIR1 deterioration process. You're still harvesting parts of him, David said, disgust evident in his voice, even though he's basically not human anymore. That's enough, Garcia, Richards snapped. You both have a new assignment. Report to equipment in 30 minutes. After they left, David turned to me. They're going to keep us here forever, aren't they? Lab rats until we either die or turn into whatever James is becoming. I nodded, keeping my voice low. Unless we find a way out. The armed escorts arrived precisely on time, leading us to the equipment room where tactical gear awaited. The briefing was simple. Infiltrate a mock terrorist compound constructed about 100 miles from the main facility, neutralize all opposition forces, played by military personnel with simulation weapons, and extract a case containing intelligence materials. This will be your first field test beyond the facility boundaries, Richards explained, spreading a topographical map on the table. The compound is here, in this valley. Under normal circumstances, it would require a full squad nearly 2 days to reach the location and complete the objective. He looked up, studying us with calculating eyes. I expect you to complete it in under 12 hours. The trek to the target location would have been grueling for normal humans. Rugged mountain terrain, dense forest, and steep ravines under the harsh Alaskan elements. For us, it was almost effortless. David and I moved through the wilderness with supernatural speed and agility, covering ground that should have taken days in mere hours. This still feels wrong, David said as we paused on a ridge overlooking the mock compound. The facility below consisted of several prefabricated buildings arranged in a defensive perimeter, with armed personnel patrolling the grounds. These abilities, they're not meant for humans to have. I studied the compound through binoculars, mapping patrol patterns and identifying entry points. Too late to worry about that now. We are what they made us. And what exactly is that? David asked quietly. Because sometimes I catch myself thinking like a predator. I watch people move and I see targets, prey. He looked at his hands. The bloodlust may not be there, but something else is taking its place. I lowered the binoculars, unable to admit I'd felt the same changes. Let's just get this done and get back, one problem at a time. We infiltrated the compound with ease. The soldiers playing opposition forces never stood a chance. Their movements seemed painfully slow to our enhanced perception, their tactics predictable and ineffective. We neutralized 23 hostiles in under 7 minutes, moving through the compound like ghosts. No bullets, no weapons beyond our hands and bodies. Just quick, precise strikes that rendered men unconscious before they realized we were there. I located the intelligence package in a reinforced safe that I tore open like cardboard. Inside was a metal briefcase containing nothing but a note from Colonel Richards. Test complete. Return to base. The entire exercise had taken less than 4 hours from deployment to completion. We made the return journey in silence, both processing the implications of what we had become. By any military standard, we were the perfect weapons. Faster, stronger, and more lethal than any normal human could hope to match. And there were only 2 of us. What would an army of enhanced soldiers like us mean for warfare? 3 days later, we approached the facility perimeter in the pre-dawn light. Something felt wrong immediately. The security checkpoint at the main entrance stood abandoned, its windows shattered and door hanging ajar. "Stay alert," I whispered to David, though I didn't need to. His posture had already changed to combat readiness, eyes scanning for threats. We entered the checkpoint cautiously. Blood spattered the walls and pooled on the floor, already dry and darkening. No bodies, just the evidence of violence. The security monitors displayed static, and the communication system remained silent despite my attempts to contact the main facility. "Emergency power," David noted, pointing to the red auxiliary lights that cast the corridor in a bloody glow. Something triggered the lockdown protocol. We both knew what, or who, that something likely was. The main entrance required both keycard and biometric authentication. With the systems compromised, I had to force the doors open, metal groaning as I pried them apart with my enhanced strength. Beyond lay a nightmare. The corridors of the facility had become a slaughterhouse. Bloody handprints marked walls where people had tried to flee. Spent shell casings littered the floor near defensive positions that had proved useless, and the bodies, or what remained of them. The first researcher we found lay sprawled in the corridor leading to the laboratories, his chest cavity torn open and emptied. Not just killed, but consumed. The second and third we discovered in similar states in the adjacent offices. None had bullet wounds. Whatever killed them had used claws and teeth. "James," David whispered, his face pale despite his enhanced constitution. We moved deeper into the facility, following the trail of carnage. In the main laboratory, 5 more bodies lay in various states of dismemberment. Blood had been splashed across equipment and walls in arterial sprays, and deep gouges marked the metal tables where something with inhuman strength had torn through them. "We need to find any survivors," David said, though his tone suggested he didn't expect any. The control room door had been ripped from its hinges and thrown across the room. Inside, the command center had been destroyed, monitors smashed, equipment crushed, and in the center of it all, Dr. Harmon and Colonel Richards, or what was left of them. Richards lay face up, his chest and abdomen torn apart, ribcage splayed open like wings. Dr. Harmon's body had been positioned beside him, her head twisted at an impossible angle, eyes open in a final expression of terror. Unlike the others, they hadn't just been killed for sustenance. The arrangement of their bodies suggested something more deliberate, almost ritualistic. "Jesus," David breathed. He didn't just kill them. He wanted them to suffer. I moved to the single intact monitor still displaying feeds from the facility security cameras. The system automatically archived footage, and I rewound to see what had happened. The recording showed James in his containment cell, strapped to the reinforced table as usual. 2 scientists in hazmat suits were extracting samples when something changed in James's demeanor. He went completely still, then began straining against his restraints with renewed purpose. The titanium bands designed to hold him began to bend, then snap one by one. The scientists backed away, hitting emergency buttons, but it was too late. James tore free, his movement inhumanly fast. He seized the first scientist, ripping through the hazmat suit to tear out the man's throat. The second tried to flee, but James pounced with animal speed, dragging him down. What followed was too graphic to watch without turning away, but I forced myself to witness it. James fed on both men, growing stronger with each feeding. Then he looked directly at the camera, smiled with blood-stained teeth, and moved with purpose toward the exit. The subsequent footage showed his methodical hunt through the facility. He didn't just kill, he stalked, ambushed, and toyed with his prey. The security teams fired hundreds of rounds with little effect. Tranquilizer darts bounced off his gray, leathery skin. He moved through their defenses like they weren't there, his body now completely transformed from anything human. The last clip showed him cornering Dr. Harmon and Colonel Richards in the control room. Their deaths had not been quick. "He's still here," David whispered, reading my thoughts. "And now he's hunting us." A soft thump from the ventilation duct above us confirmed his words. Something large moved through the air system, metal groaning under its weight. "We need to get out," I said, backing toward the door. "Now!" We sprinted down the corridor toward the nearest exit, but a crash from ahead stopped us. A vent cover flew across the hallway, bent and twisted, followed by a shape that dropped to the floor in a predatory crouch. I barely recognized what had once been James Chen. His body had transformed completely. Gray, leathery skin stretched over hugely enlarged muscles, elongated limbs ending in clawed hands, and a face that had restructured itself for feeding. His jaw extended forward, filled with pointed teeth arranged in multiple rows. The only human feature that remained were his eyes, still completely black, but now filled with malevolent intelligence. "Vincent," the creature rasped, its voice a distorted version of James's. "David, brothers. Finally." "James," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't you. The serum did this." He tilted his head, studying us like curious specimens. "No, this is me. True me. True you too, soon." He inhaled deeply. "I smell it in your blood. Different but same beneath. Just sleeping." He took a step forward. "Been waiting. Making ready. Need you both to complete." "Complete what?" David asked, positioning himself slightly in front of me. James smiled, a horrific stretching of his transformed face. "The becoming. Your blood. His blood. My blood. All together." He lunged with blinding speed. David shoved me aside with enhanced strength, placing himself in James's path. I crashed into the wall as James collided with David, both of them tumbling to the floor in a blur of movement. David fought with everything SIR-2 had given him: strength, speed, combat instincts. But James had transformed beyond even our enhancements. His clawed hands tore through David's tactical gear and into flesh, ripping and tearing with each strike. "Run!" David shouted, blood spraying from his mouth as James's teeth sank into his shoulder. "Vincent, go!" I hesitated for one terrible second, torn between helping my last teammate and the certainty that we both would die if I stayed. Then training and survival instinct took over. I turned and ran, using every ounce of my enhanced speed. Behind me, David's screams turned to wet, gurgling sounds, then silence. I raced through the facility's corridors, sealing emergency doors behind me. Each barrier might buy me seconds, nothing more. I needed to get out, to escape, before James finished with David, and came for me. As I rounded the corner to the east exit, I caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection of a shattered glass panel. James moved along the ceiling, his transformed body clinging to the surface like an insect, pursuing me with a single-minded purpose. I crashed through the emergency exit into the Alaskan dawn, the cold air shocking my lungs. The perimeter fence stood ahead, 12 feet of reinforced steel topped with razor wire. Nothing to an enhanced soldier. I cleared it in a single bound, landing in the snow beyond. A roar echoed from the facility behind me. Rage and hunger mixed in an inhuman sound that carried across the frozen landscape. I didn't look back. I ran, pushing my enhanced body to its limits, knowing that what pursued me was no longer my teammate or even a man. The facility had become a slaughterhouse. Everyone was dead: researchers, security, Colonel Richards, Dr. Harmon, and now David. I was the only survivor, carrying in my veins the same substance that had turned James into a monster. Metal groaned under tremendous pressure as I sealed the final emergency bulkhead. James's inhuman roar echoed through the ventilation system, making the overhead lights flicker. I'd managed to lure him to the lower levels by activating emergency protocols throughout different sections of the facility, creating a maze that even his predatory instincts couldn't navigate quickly enough. Containment Protocol Alpha 7 engaged, announced the automated system as steel barriers descended from the ceiling. Biohazard quarantine active. The pounding started immediately. James slammed against the reinforced doors with such force that the walls shuddered. Each impact sounded louder than the last. "Hold," I whispered to the barrier. "Just hold." I didn't have much time. Everyone in the facility was dead. The image of David's final moments flashed in my mind, his blood spraying across the corridor wall as James tore into him. I pushed the memory away. Grief would have to wait. Moving quickly through the blood-splattered corridors, I headed for the main laboratory. The room had been destroyed in James's rampage, but the secure storage units remained intact. I broke open the biometric lock with a single punch, tearing through metal that would have been impenetrable to normal human strength. Inside, I found what I needed. Vials of SIR-1 and SIR-2, labeled tissue samples, and hard drives containing research data. I stuffed everything into a backpack. In Dr. Harmon's office, I found her personal tablet still logged into the system. It contained video logs of the entire project, from subject selection to the final horrifying transformation of James. I added it to my collection. A particularly violent crash echoed through the facility, followed by the blaring of alarms. "Warning, containment breach detected in Sector 4. Initiating secondary containment protocols." James was breaking through. The facility had been designed to contain biohazards, not super soldiers turned monsters. I needed to move faster. In the security office, I downloaded surveillance footage onto portable drives, capturing everything from our arrival months ago to James's escape and subsequent massacre. The evidence in my backpack was damning, proof of military experimentation gone horribly wrong. Another crash, closer this time. The ventilation ducts above me creaked as something heavy moved through them. I grabbed my backpack and ran for the emergency exit on the east side of the facility, the one furthest from James's last known position. The exit required a keycard I didn't have, so I simply tore the door from its frame. Cold Alaskan air hit me forcefully as I stepped outside. The facility had been built into the side of a mountain, surrounded by wilderness in all directions. The nearest town was over 100 miles away. Behind me, another alarm sounded. James had broken through another containment level. I didn't look back as I sprinted into the forest, my enhanced body moving at speeds no normal human could match. Even with my advantages, James would be faster, stronger. My only hope was distance and the continued functioning of the remaining containment barriers. The Alaskan wilderness in winter was extremely dangerous. Temperatures dropped to -30, snow lay thick on the ground, and predators roamed freely. An ordinary person wouldn't survive. For me, it was helpful. The harsh conditions might slow even James if he managed to escape. I ran through the first day without stopping, putting miles between myself and the facility. My enhanced physiology burned energy at an alarming rate, but I couldn't stop. Each time I considered resting, I remembered the sound of James moving through the ventilation ducts, the wet tearing sound as he fed on David. By the second day, hunger and exhaustion began to affect even my enhanced body. I'd crossed mountains, forded half-frozen rivers, and navigated dense forests. The backpack containing the evidence felt heavier with each step. I forced myself to keep moving, using trees for support when my legs threatened to give out. As night fell on the second day, I finally collapsed against the trunk of a massive pine. My body had reached its limit. I pulled the backpack close, protecting the evidence even as I passed out. In the distance, I heard the rhythmic thumping of helicopter rotors, but couldn't tell if it was real or hallucination before I blacked out. I awoke to bright lights and the sterile smell of a medical facility. Restraints secured my wrists and ankles to the bed, thick, reinforced bonds that might actually hold someone with my strength. An IV dripped clear fluid into my arm, and monitoring equipment surrounded the bed. Men in military uniforms stood guard by the door. "He's awake," one of them spoke into a radio. "Get the general." "Where am I?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Where's my backpack?" Neither guard answered, their faces impassive behind mirrored sunglasses. Minutes passed in tense silence before the door opened, admitting a doctor in a white coat followed by a stern-faced man with silver hair and a chest full of medals. "Sergeant Marshall," the older man said, pulling up a chair beside my bed. "I'm General Marcus Hamilton. You've caused quite a situation." The doctor checked my vitals with clinical efficiency, drawing yet another vial of blood from my arm. I'd been poked and prodded so many times over the past months that the needle barely registered. "The facility," I said, struggling against the restraints. "There's a creature there, James Chen. He killed everyone." Hamilton's expression didn't change. "We've sent a team to assess the situation. The facility has been secured." He leaned forward, hands clasped. "What I need from you now is a full account of what happened." I told him everything: the SIR-1 injections, James's deterioration, the massacre, my escape. As I spoke, I watched their reactions closely. The doctor occasionally glanced at Hamilton, who maintained a perfect poker face throughout. "And the others?" I asked when I finished. "Daniel Wright, Tom Peterson, David Garcia?" "Training accident," Hamilton replied smoothly. "A regrettable loss of life during a classified military exercise." I was shocked by the dismissal. "Training accident? That's the story you're going with?" They were torn apart. The serum turned James into a monster and he slaughtered them. Hamilton signaled to the doctor, who quietly left the room. Once the door closed, the general's demeanor changed to become cold and calculating. "Sergeant, let me be perfectly clear about your situation. Project Prometheus was a classified military operation at the highest level. The events you described, while unfortunate, fall under national security protocols. People need to know what happened," I insisted. "What the military was doing, creating super soldiers that turn into monsters. The evidence in my backpack has been confiscated and secured." Hamilton finished for me. "As have you." For weeks they kept me in isolation. Different doctors conducted tests daily: blood draws, muscle biopsies, stress tests to measure my enhanced capabilities. They never used names, referring to me only as the subject during their clinical discussions. They ignored my protests. My demands to speak to anyone outside the facility were ignored. I was a prisoner in all but name, kept alive only because my body contained valuable military secrets. One morning, about 3 weeks after my rescue, 2 MPs escorted me to a conference room where General Hamilton waited with several officials in suits. "Sit down, Marshal." Hamilton gestured to an empty chair across from him. "We need to discuss your future." I remained standing. "Am I under arrest?" "That depends entirely on you," one of the suits replied. "I'm Richard Bentley, Department of Defense. We've reviewed your statement regarding Project Prometheus." "And?" I asked. "And it presents a significant problem," Bentley said, sliding a folder across the table. "Inside, you'll find 2 options." I opened the folder. The first document was an honorable discharge with full benefits and a sizable lump sum payment. The second was a sealed indictment for treason. "Your choice is simple," Hamilton said. "Accept the discharge, sign the non-disclosure agreements, and walk away with a medal for classified service to your country. Or attempt to pursue this matter further, in which case we'll prosecute you for treason, espionage, and theft of classified materials." "That's not a choice," I said. "That's blackmail." "That's national security," Bentley corrected. Project Prometheus represented billions in military research. The technology in your blood could completely transform warfare. It turned my friend into a monster that ate people. Hamilton shrugged. An unfortunate outcome with that particular subject. The project continues with improvements based on the data collected. I stared at him in disbelief. You're continuing the program after everything that happened? With modifications, Hamilton said casually. Your adaptation to SIR-2 proved remarkably stable. In fact, your blood samples have provided valuable insights for the next phase. I suddenly realized they weren't just continuing the program. They were using me to improve it. Every blood draw, every test, had been designed to refine their monster-making process. What happened to James? I asked. Hamilton and Bentley briefly looked at each other. Subject 2 has been contained, Hamilton said carefully. That's all you need to know. I looked down at the folder again, at the 2 documents representing my future. I could fight, try to expose what had happened, what they were continuing to do. But who would believe me? How far would I get before they stopped me? And what would they do with me then? I picked up the pen and signed the discharge papers. Hamilton smiled thinly. Wise choice, Marshal. You'll receive your medal in a private ceremony tomorrow. After that, you're free to go, provided you maintain absolute silence regarding Project Prometheus. And if I don't? I asked. Then treason will be the least of your concerns, Bentley said quietly. The next day, they pinned a nameless medal to my chest in a room with no witnesses, shook my hand for photos that would never be published, and drove me to the nearest civilian airport with instructions never to contact anyone associated with the military again. At 31, I was a free man with a secret that would kill me if I shared it. The years blurred together after that. I moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough to form connections. Cincinnati, Phoenix, Detroit, Portland. I never considered these cities my home, just places to stay temporarily. I worked jobs that required physical labor, construction, warehouse work, security, anything that would exhaust my enhanced body enough to allow a few hours of sleep. I avoided doctors, hospitals, and anyone who might notice that I wasn't aging normally. The serum had changed me at a cellular level. At 40, I looked 35 despite the stress and nightmares that should have aged me faster. My wounds healed too quickly. Illnesses barely affected me, and I never got tired like normal people did. I lived invisibly, leaving no trace, forming no bonds. The nightmares followed me everywhere. James's black eyes finding mine through the glass. His inhuman voice rasping my name. The wet sound of tearing flesh as he fed on David. Some nights, I woke up screaming, my enhanced strength destroying whatever furniture was unfortunate enough to be within reach. 5 years after the incident, I found work at a slaughterhouse in Nebraska. The owner didn't ask questions when I gave him my fake ID, just nodded at my build and put me on the killing floor. The work was brutal and bloody, perfect for someone seeking physical exhaustion. One evening, as the shift ended, I was hosing blood from the concrete floor when something changed inside me. The coppery smell hit my nostrils differently than before, triggering a response I'd never felt. A gnawing hunger that had nothing to do with food. My vision sharpened, focusing on the crimson stream swirling down the drain. Without thinking, I dropped to my knees and plunged my hands into the bloody water. The urge to bring it to my mouth was overwhelming, a compulsion beyond rational thought. I fought it, digging my nails into my palms until they bled, using pain to keep myself focused. "Marshal!" My supervisor's voice broke the trance. "You sick or something?" I staggered to my feet, struggling to appear normal. Yeah, just lightheaded. Must be the heat. That night, I packed my few belongings and left town, terrified by what had happened. It wasn't just the hunger, it was the recognition. I had seen that same look in James's eyes weeks before he broke. The episodes grew more frequent over the years, triggered by the sight or smell of blood. A cut finger, a nosebleed, rare steak on someone's plate. Any exposure could set it off. Each time, the hunger grew stronger, harder to resist. By the 10th year after Project Prometheus, I had isolated myself completely. I lived on the outskirts of cities, working night shifts to avoid people, shopping at odd hours. I kept my freezer stocked with raw meat, discovering that consuming it bloody helped take the edge off the cravings. The dreams evolved too. Now James spoke to me through them, calling me brother, telling me it was only a matter of time. I would wake sweating, feeling my teeth with my tongue, afraid they might have sharpened during the night. In year 15, during a particularly bad episode triggered by a car accident I witnessed, I caught my reflection in a window. For a split second, my eyes had darkened, not fully black like James's had become, but darker than they should be. The sight terrified me more than anything else, physical proof that the transformation had begun. I started keeping records then, dates and durations of the hunger episodes, triggers, physical changes I observed. The pattern was undeniable. The cravings were becoming more frequent, more intense. What had once been manageable through sheer willpower now required days of recovery. Each episode left me weaker against the next. By year 17, I knew I was running out of time. The hunger was almost constant now, a background presence even on good days. I lived on raw meat and kept physical distance from anyone whose blood might tempt me. Some nights I would chain myself to the bed, not trusting what I might do while unconscious. The irony wasn't lost on me. The military had created a monster in their quest for the perfect soldier, and now I was becoming exactly what I'd feared and fought against. James's words returned to me night after night in my dreams. True me, true you too, soon. I sat in my latest apartment, a sparse one-bedroom in Chicago, examining my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My eyes had definitely changed, the irises darkening in a way that couldn't be explained by lighting. My teeth remained normal, but for how much longer? I gradually made my decision, then became certain. If I couldn't stop what was happening to me, I could at least ensure the world knew the truth before I lost control completely. The military was still creating super soldiers. I'd seen enough news reports about impossible military operations, heard enough whispers on underground forums to know Project Prometheus hadn't died with Colonel Richards. I owed it to Daniel, to Tom, to David, and even to the man James had once been to expose what had been done to us. That night I set up my laptop and began typing. My name is Vincent Marshall. What I'm about to share will sound impossible, but I swear every word is true. Before I become something I can't control, I need to expose what the government has done, what they turned us into. The confession was only the beginning. Now I had to find proof that the program continued, and if possible, stop it before more monsters like James were created. I had to face the reality that I was changing. Each passing day brought me closer to the creature I'd spent 17 years running from. I could feel the hunger even now, a constant presence at the edge of my awareness, waiting for a moment of weakness. Time was running out.